On behalf of 25th Street Theatre, I would like to welcome you to This Is Not That Festival. Before our programming begins, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land we are living, creating, and performing on. The land I'm currently on is Treaty 6 territory. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous First Nations, including the Cree, the Dene, the Nakota, the Saulteaux, the Ojibwe, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We, at 25th Street, pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and we reaffirm our relationship with one another. As the majority of this festival is being streamed live over the internet, we ask that you join us by commenting below where you are from, and if you know what treaty or traditional lands you are on, please be sure to include that information as well. Thank you, and enjoy. What it looked like in the 70s and 80s might not look the same as what it looks like now, but I think if you go back to that idea of representing underserved populations and making sure that the stories that matter to the people here are expressed on our stages, it's going to create a really dynamic and interesting future for 25th Street.
Hello, I'm Eric Anderson. Welcome to a special bonus episode of YXE Underground, looking at the history of Saskatoon's 25th Street Theatre. We are lucky to have a strong tradition of live theatre in Saskatoon, and what I've learned in the last few months is that 25th Street Theatre is at the heart of that tradition. I'll speak with three people who have played an important role in 25th Street Theatre's history and its current executive director to discover what the future holds for the Saskatoon Theatre Company in this special bonus episode of YXE Underground. I hope your summer is going well. It's certainly different to have a Saskatoon summer without events like the Jazz Festival, Shakespeare in the Saskatchewan, and the exhibition, but this remains a very different time, so I hope you're staying safe and healthy. One of my Saskatoon summer staples is the Fringe Festival, which is produced by 25th Street Theatre. Now, due to COVID-19, the Fringe is not taking place in its traditional way, but it is moving online. From July 30th to August 8th, the This Is Not That Festival will bring all the energy and creativity of the Fringe online, and I'm really excited that this podcast is part of the festival. I was asked to tell the history of 25th Street Theatre by the company's current executive director, Anita Smith. Anita is a good friend of mine. She and my wife have been friends since they were kids growing up in southwest Saskatchewan, and I've had the fortune of interviewing Anita several times in her capacity as a local actor and director. She is a passionate and articulate voice for Saskatoon's theatre community, and when she asked if I would volunteer my time to make this podcast, well, it's really hard to say no to Anita. For brand new listeners of the podcast, YXE Underground features interviews with people who are making a difference in Saskatoon but are flying under the radar. The podcast just wrapped up its second season, with Season 3 debuting in September. A few weeks ago, Anita came over to my backyard, which is where I am right now, to talk about 25th Street Theatre, the This Is Not That Festival, and why she's so excited about the future of the company. I started by asking Anita why she wanted to tell the history of 25th Street Theatre in a podcast.
I wanted to tell the history of 25th Street Theatre because I've been in the job with 25th Street for a year, and when I got there and I started digging, I was finding it difficult to find information on what the theater company had done before. So I felt like that had been lost from the general consciousness of our community. Like, it felt like we didn't have that information just floating around freely anymore. As a theater artist in the city, I know a lot about the companies that are working here because I've been involved with them. But 25th Street isn't producing their own work anymore. So that history, which was a very long history of them creating their own work and producing their own shows, seemed to have been lost. So I wanted to bring that back and start talking about what it was we had done which would hopefully help us figure out where it is we want to go.
Why why was this so why was this so important to you?
I think that 25th Street was really integral to establishing the theater scene here in Saskatoon in particular. There were two theater companies that were sort of getting started at the same time. Persephone Theater, which is very well established in our community right now, and 25th Street Theater. And somewhere along the line, 25th Street just sort of disappeared, faded away. And the name 25th Street Theater is not something that people are even aware of right now, when they aren't aware that the Saskatoon Fringe is produced by 25th Street Theater. That's all we've become known as, is Saskatoon Fringe Festival. But there is a whole theater company with an entire history, a very long and complex history behind it. So I just wanted to bring that back into the conversation. And because I'm new in this job, I want to look at where we're going to go. Where's 25th Street going to go next? And so there's been a lot of conversation at the board level about what we used to do. So that piqued my curiosity even further to go digging into what exactly is it that we used to do.
I want to get to the future in a bit, but when you started to learn about what 25th Street Theater used to do, were there some things that stood out to you?
For sure. One thing that definitely stood out was that we have an Oscar nominated actor who has been a part of our company in the past. Graham Greene, who was nominated for the Best Supporting Actor Award for his work in Dances with Wolves, did a show with 25th Street Theater. The show Paper Wheat is billed as the most famous play to ever come out of Saskatchewan. There was a National Film Board documentary made about the show. It definitely struck a chord with people in this province at the time that it was out touring. So that's another one that stands out to me. We've had a really rich history in terms of you don't have to look far to see that artists that you are watching work right now in our community have a connection to 25th Street Theater in some way.
Do you know why the history sort of like fell off a bit? Because like it is a very eclectic history, but obviously like you said, everyone in this city in the theater scene has some sort of connection to it. But why do you think the history sort of got lost?
I think when they made the decision to, it was, they were basically forced to make a decision as to whether or not to continue to produce their own work or to continue to produce the Fringe Festival. And they made the decision to produce the Fringe Festival. And I think when that happened, the Fringe is a powerful engine, and it just basically took over the narrative, and that's who 25th Street became.
You mentioned the importance of learning about the past so that you kind of know where to go in the future. So, Anita Smith, where would you like to go in the future for this theater company?
Well, Eric, that's not entirely up to me, but we are having a lot of conversations at the board level right now about what place we feel we could hold within the community. We're examining, basically what's out there right now. Saskatoon's theater community is super active. It's really vibrant. Well, I mean, COVID has put a damper on things, of course, but it is happening in place, and so basically we're kind of wondering, well, where do we fit in now? And a lot has been revealed to me based on what we have been looking back at, which has helped me to figure out where I think we need to go. And where I think we need to go is, people will say, like, we need to get back to our roots, back to who we were. But I don't think there's any point in going back. But it doesn't mean we can't learn from what we did. And I think what was happening, in the heyday of 25th Street Theater was they were tapping into an audience that felt underrepresented on the stages, an audience who felt that their stories weren't being heard, an audience that didn't see themselves reflected up there on stage. And that's a conversation that I'm interested in having, because I think that we are not serving everyone that we could serve as a theater community. So, what it looked like in the 70s and 80s might not look the same as what it looks like now. But I think if you go back to that idea of representing underserved populations and making sure that the stories that matter to the people here are expressed on our stages, it's going to create a really dynamic and interesting future for 25th Street.
One of the many things I admire about you is that when you put your mind to something, it gets done, but it gets done in a very creative and caring and collaborative way. So I'm very excited to see where the future of the theater company goes. And I just want to thank you personally for asking me to be involved in this podcast project, because I think it's a cool way to tell the story, and yet also sort of lay the path for what's to come. So thanks, Anita.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. Eric, I wouldn't have had anyone else do it.
When looking at the history of Saskatoon's 25th Street Theatre, it makes sense to begin with Dwayne Brenna. Dwayne is an award-winning author who wrote Our Kind of Work, The Glory Days and Difficult Times of 25th Street Theatre back in 2011. The book was nominated for a Saskatchewan Book Award in non-fiction. Dwayne has a very eclectic history with 25th Street, and man can he tell a story, especially when it comes to the company's first artistic director, Andy Than. He gave me a wonderful history lesson earlier this month in his backyard here in Saskatoon, and I started by asking why he wanted to write a book on 25th Street Theatre.
What kind of amazed me was their constant battles over finances with mostly the Saskatchewan Arts Board, but the Canada Council as well. Their struggles to get funding from them, and I know because I interviewed Andy Tan for the book. I know he was more interested in me celebrating the artistic successes, and there were many. Paper Wheat was a huge artistic success, possibly the greatest example of popular culture to have left this province as a theatrical piece, playing across Canada, to rave reviews in places like Toronto and Montreal. So there was that, but there were also just some hilarious moments in the running of the theater that intrigued me too. I happened to work with Andy Tan as an actor at the end of the period that I wrote about in 1982. I toured a show called the Laughin' Jack Rivers Show, playing a bartender, a kind of an anti-artist bartender. And the show featured a young Colin Munn, who is now known as Colin James, playing guitar. Ian Black was in the show. John LeClaire, some really good musicians in the show as well. And it was mostly a musical. It was by Ken Mitchell, who wrote the text, and Michael Taylor, who wrote the songs. Michael, of course, worked with Humphrey and the Dump Trucks and all those guys that hung around 25th Street Theatre. But I remember going into Melfort towards the end of our tour. We toured the province, and the theater was going broke. It was always going broke. It was run on a shoestring. And we always sent an advance vehicle in with posters and things. And as we were approaching Melfort, we heard that the guy driving the advance vehicle was charged with auto theft, that the cops had impounded the vehicle so there would be no publicity for this show. And what had happened was Andy had just borrowed the car from a friend, right? Because he had no money to pay for it. And the friend, I don't know what he thought, but after about a month, he kind of went, "Well, where's my car?" And Andy was nowhere to be found because he was out on the road with the show. And so he reported it stolen, and we got picked up in Melfort with a stolen vehicle.
Did the show go ahead in Melfort that night?
Yeah, man, we did Melfort. We did Prince Albert after that. We ended up down south somewhere. I forget where it was, Swift Current or someplace like that. And we get a call from Andy, after the show. He said, you have to come home. And I'm like, we had like 2 weeks left of the tour. And he said, why, Andy, why? And he said, well, because the theater's bankrupt. We're in receivership. So we had to make our way back to Saskatoon. I remember Ken and Michael were, kind of interested in keeping the tour going as a kind of an independent production, but we were all hired under equity contracts. So, we would have been, in trouble with our union had we continued in that way. But I'm not sure that every show was run that way by 25th Street Theater, but it was really, it was my first time being employed, first and, well, no, not my last, but my first time being employed by 25th Street Theater. And I kind of went, whoa, this is theater on the run.
I'm curious too, like at that time, like how hard was it for a theater company like 25th Street Theater to like not only make a profit but just kind of sustain itself? Like what was the theater scene like then?
Well, I mean, 25th Street had a large subscription audience that was made up of a lot of kind of university students, ex-university students, a very educated audience, and they were willing to spend money on plays that were not proven. They were interested in Saskatchewan art. But, anytime a theater company comes in with such a regional mandate as 25th Street Theater had, they're going to have trouble, getting money from, the Canada Council, the Arts Board, any arts groups, because, I mean, just by the nature of the beast, if you're just producing new plays, they're going to be plays that are untested, and probably you're going to have like one hit per season. So out of 5 or 6 plays, maybe one show is really good. The subscription audience at the time in the 70s seemed to be fine with that, but in order to get money from the Arts Board, for example, when Persephone Theater came in at about the same time, they were doing tried and tested, often American plays, Hot L, Baltimore. I did Long Day's Journey into Night there just a year before the Laughin' Jack Rivers show. They were getting, pretty good funding and continue to do so, as you can see. I mean, they occupy a beautiful new theater in town. And of course, there was the whole theater space fiasco. There was no purpose-built theater space for what were then the 2 major professional companies in the town, 25th and Persephone. 25th performed on a disused store on 8th Street for a while, and Castle Theater, St. James Hall over on the west side, various other spaces, Greystone Theater on campus, and then they ended up in the period that I'm writing about sharing an old church on 20th Street with Persephone Theater. So I mean, they were constantly looking for the possibility of a dedicated theater space, that even if the 2 of them could share it, it didn't quite work out that way in the end. Persephone seemed to have gotten the space. 25th Street is, largely working through the fringe right now and so forth, and with no permanent theater space even yet, I think.
You paint a picture of, this theater company that is definitely telling unique stories and unique Saskatchewan stories. And like you said, they have a dedicated following, even though there was no kind of guaranteed hits for their plays. They were still telling these stories, and there was that dedicated following. I'm wondering why do you think they had such a dedicated following that was willing to, I picture it as a I love music, and when certain bands that I love, maybe they do an album that's kind of out of left field, I'm gonna stick with them and kind of go down that journey with them. But why do you think so many people were willing to follow 25th Street wherever wherever their creative influences led them.
Well, I think Tan was a very diverse individual. He grew up in Saskatoon here. He knew a lot of people. If you talk to arts funders about Andy Tan, they will say that you just couldn't say no to the guy. He would just wear you down. But he also did that with the people he worked with. Not wear them down, but but get them involved. So in his vision of 25th Street Theatre, he saw it as a kind of a polymorphous outfit that was not just theater. It was literary arts, it was music, it was everything else. So, for example, Don Freed, if you were to interview him, would talk about his long association with 25th Street Theatre. They also had a journal for a while called Targia, which was a literary journal, another feature of the theater back then, which Bill Boyle, who's a Los Angeles screenwriter now, was the editor for. So I mean, they were just so diverse. They appealed to such a broad sector of the community, but also they were interested in popular culture. If you're looking at plays of most regional theaters, the repertoire is arguably, sort of upper class theater. It's plays that have done well on Broadway or on the West End of London and so forth. And if you look at Paper Wheat, it's got everything that popular theater should have. It's got juggling, a fiddle player, Bill Prokopchuk, who was the Western Canadian Fiddle Championship guy. It had all sorts of songs and music. It had some juggling, some dancing, vignettes about the wheat pool and the farm. It was, if you were going to put together a show that somebody in Sintoluta might like just as much as somebody in Saskatoon, that would be the show. So I mean, at its best, 25th was able to cover that huge sort of popular theater mandate. That's what made it really popular. I mean, I've got to say, they struggled for a few years. I mean, 1972 to 75 were a struggle for the theater, and it wasn't until Paper Wheat came out that all of a sudden the theater was seen to have come of age, and then that was followed by a string of hits, not necessarily regional hits anymore. By the late 70s they were doing Wolf Boy by Brad Fraser from Edmonton. They were doing various plays from Vancouver and Toronto as well. They were still Canadian in their mandate, but less regional in their mandate. And I mean, the problem with the whole regional mandate was there was no Saskatchewan Playwrights Centre in 1975. So there were few people who would call themselves professional playwrights in the province at the time. Once the Playwrights Centre came along, people could workshop plays. There was a brief golden period where a lot of playwrights were working in the province. And I would say that movement kind of started to fizzle when 25th Street stopped producing, new work. So yeah, I mean that's the legacy of 25th Street Theatre.
You know what? It was just funny because I was just about to ask you as a final question what that legacy is of 25th Street Theatre, but you sort of touched on it there. Is there anything else though, like when you think back to obviously to the book that you wrote, but just to that time period and you see what's happening today with the company and just the theater scene in this city and province, any other legacies stand out to you?
Well, I mean, it's still, the theater is still the beacon for popular culture and a certain kind of devised theater. I mean, we talk a lot about devised theater. I teach in the drama department at the university. We talk a lot about that in classes and sometimes do a lot of devised theater. But 25th Street Theatre was doing that before almost anybody else in Canada was doing it.
You have to explain to me what devised theater is.
Well, that's simply a collective creation where
Okay.
where the actors, do the research, as they did on Paper Wheat, for example, read all the books they can about the founding of the Saskatchewan wheat pool, and then turn that into a play, which is often trial and error. Actors are given assignments. They're asked to, improvise a scene about Ed Partridge and the founding of the wheat pool or something like how to make that interesting, but they did, right? I mean, I wouldn't have looked at it as an interesting thing. I mean, there was only really, one other theater at the time that was kind of the flagship of that movement. And that was Theatre Passe Muraille in Toronto, and 25th Street had a long-standing relationship with them. Paul Thompson from Theatre Passe Muraille came out and devised the West Show out here, which became a big show back in Toronto. And then as a sort of a return favor, he helped Andy on a production called If You're So Good, Why Are You in Saskatoon? Which is what I think about 1978. I can't remember the dates, but yeah, I mean, so here's this beacon of devised, improvised theater in this province, when it wasn't happening too often in other places in Canada. Of course, there were also people like Linda Griffiths and Sharon Backer and Lane Coleman, Bob Baker, and others, many others, who went out, got their start with 25th Street Theatre, and then went out into the country and became major shakers and movers. So that also is, I'd say, part of the legacy of the theatre.
It's been a real pleasure speaking with you and hearing all these stories. The next time I go to Melfort, I'll look at it a little bit differently.
I grew up near Melfort, so it's got a special ring for me. I remember thinking, hey, I'm going home. Well, wait a minute, the car's been stolen.
Oh, that's too funny. Dwayne, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for inviting me to your beautiful backyard on a sunny July afternoon. And yeah, thanks for sharing so many stories. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Eric, and enjoyed talking to you.
One of 25th Street Theatre's strengths over the years has been its desire to tell authentic Saskatchewan stories. That was certainly the case when it produced a play called Jessica, a play co-written by Linda Griffiths and Maria Campbell based on Maria's life. Maria Campbell is an esteemed and award-winning Métis playwright and author. She lives in Saskatoon and is currently a cultural advisor at the University of Saskatchewan's Indigenous Law Centre. Maria graciously invited me to her home to talk not only about her experiences with 25th Street Theatre, but why Indigenous stories need to be told in Saskatchewan, no matter how challenging they are.
I first met people at 25th Street when I went to see the farm show. So it was a long time ago.
Okay.
And then over the years, I would run into people from there because I was living in Edmonton. And then I did Jessica with Paul Thompson, and so that was how we ended up working with 25th Street. He wanted to produce it in the West, and so he worked. I can't even remember who the artistic director was at the time. And then I moved back that year. My father got very ill, so I came home, and then we rehearsed Jessica here, and then it played, and then we'd come to plays, and then I did a play with the late Harry Daniels called One More Time, but Tom Bentley Fisher was the artistic director then, and so they did a series of plays by Indigenous playwrights that year. And there was myself and somebody, what was his name now? I can't remember, but there was, I think, 3 or 4 plays. And so that was how but I've never really had anything to do with 25th Street. Tom was a friend of mine, and And that was the play was already written when we came, and that was it. I don't know much about it since because it closed down after a while, and you know.
I'm wondering when you were living in Edmonton, as someone who you would go to plays produced by the 25th Street Theater. What were their plays like back in the day?
They were quite amazing because they were doing improv and they were doing a different kind of theater that hadn't been done before, you know. So they were exciting, you know. They were really innovative, and I don't know what else to say about them except they were different. They were not traditional plays.
Yeah,
And they were very grounded in community.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just that when you were describing it, the word that popped into my mind was it must have been exciting to see that, and then you said it. But yeah, that must have been so neat to see, like, because it seemed like, and in doing a few other interviews too, it seemed like no one else was doing what they were doing at the time.
No, I think the only theater that I know that was doing it in Canada was Theatre Passe Muraille in Toronto, and I mean everybody was playing around with it, but they were 25th Street and Passe Muraille were the two that were really successful.
When you started working on One More Time, did you feel comfortable knowing that this was the company that was going to produce this play?
I didn't want to go away. I didn't want to, it wasn't a play that would have worked if it would have been someplace else. It was very local. Well, local, it was very Saskatchewan, so it would have been kind of difficult someplace else.
Why do you think, Maria, it's important for theater companies like 25th Street Theater, not only in the past but especially now too? Why is it important for a company like that to tell Saskatchewan stories?
Well, why would you want to tell somebody else's stories? I mean, we have some really powerful stories here, stories that nobody else can tell, and it just seems like I've never understood why people would want to tell stories about something else, other than the province. It's when I say it's exciting, the events in history, the just the way we are, it's you can't find people like that in other places. Well, you probably can, and I might be kind of, but we do have a history of resistance in Saskatchewan. People are very people work together, or used to. We have incredible tensions. Everything is very passionate and very strong. I don't think that in Saskatchewan there's anything that's mediocre. It's all just like the sky and the sunset. So you don't find any like that anyplace else. Even our tensions are like that. The tensions between people. There's nothing hidden about them. They're out there and in your face all the time.
That's very true, and that's so true too about our skies and our sunsets. But you mentioned something that really piqued my interest, and that's the collaborative approach that can happen. And I'm wondering when when One More Time was being produced here, was it in your mind? Was it kind of a collaborative experience to go from the written word to actually being produced on the stage?
Yeah, it was. I really hoped that 25th Street would do it. And then it could have went anyplace else after. It did tour in Saskatchewan, which is what I wanted. But it didn't leave the province because everything was kind of falling apart for 25th Street at the time. And so it was. There's a film producer that has it now, and they want to do a screenplay of it. But again, who knows what's going to happen?
Was it important for you that it did tour around the province, though, at the time?
Yeah, it was, because it was for me, and which is why I like 25th Street too. With the plays that I saw, because you could be political, and you could make statements, like you could, it's not like that anymore, and it certainly wasn't happening with Persephone at the time, nor is it happening today. I think Joel's play last year was probably the first play that had any grit to it, and and showed the side of Saskatchewan that's really strong.
Why do you think that is, that there isn't enough grit in theater being produced here today?
Well, I think we have, in Saskatchewan, we have a tendency to try to be somebody, and we don't realize that somebody is here. It's all about being here. I just don't think that we appreciate ourselves enough. But that's my thing. This is not a good place to be. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination making it sound like Saskatchewan is the greatest place. It's a tough place to live, especially if you're a person of color or if you're Indigenous. But it's there all the time. You know it's there. It's not pretending that it's not.
You are listening to a special bonus episode of YXE Underground. I'm your host, Eric Anderson. In this episode, we're looking at the history of Saskatoon's 25th Street Theatre as part of the This Is Not That Festival, which is replacing the Fringe this year. You can subscribe for free to YXE Underground on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Stream episodes on Spotify or the website yxeunderground.com. And if you know of someone who is making a difference in our community but is flying under the radar, please let me know. You can send an email to ericandersonyxe@gmail.com. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. One of our community's fiercest advocates for female voices in Saskatoon's theatre scene has been Cynthia Dick. Cynthia is currently the executive director of On the Board Staging Company here in Saskatoon and helped create the Hurricane Women's Festival that was put on by the 25th Street Theatre in the late 1990s. Cynthia was kind enough to have me over to her house where we talked about the importance of telling Saskatoon stories on stage and the legacy of 25th Street Theatre in our community. I started our conversation by asking Cynthia about her very first experience with 25th Street Theatre.
Well, 25th Street Theatre, interesting, is the theatre that I would have cut my teeth on. I grew up in the 70s. Both 25th and Persephone started in the 70s, but 25th Street Theatre was the one that I saw the productions of when I was in high school. So I saw their shows in their early years and was just fascinated with their... They did what was called collective creation then, and so those were the shows that I saw, and I was just fascinated by the technique.
So explain to me a little bit more about that, like, technique and what the shows were, because that sounds interesting.
Collective creation was sort of a mishmash of starting with improv and then moving it into a scripted or consistent scene. So it was, they developed it, I believe, by working with Paul Thompson from Theatre Passe Muraille in Toronto. And Theatre Passe Muraille came out here with a show created that way, and so 25th had already started, or there was a group of them that went, "Hey, we want to do that." So they got them to kind of teach them what it was about, and then that's where they created two unique things about. No, sorry, that was my high school show that we did with Lane Coleman. If You're So Good, Why Are You in Saskatoon? Prairie, I don't say prairie wheat. Prairie wheat? Is that it? All of a sudden I'm blanking because it's like their most famous. Paper wheat. That's it. Paper wheat was a collective creation. Those, I think, were the two that I remember the most. But they did some other ones like that too.
So can you take me back to like Cynthia in high school, and you're watching this, like do you remember like how it made you feel, and what was going through your mind when you saw those performances?
You know what I think was the most interesting? I remember vividly, If You're So Good, What Are You Doing in Saskatoon? And it was the first time I really saw myself reflected in a play. We're so used to Canadian content now, and shows that are about our society and our country and our lives. But in the 70s, that didn't exist. We did Neil Simon plays. We saw American plays all the time. We saw big musicals. We knew more about American life than we did anything about Canadian life. So the stage, and there really weren't a lot of Canadian playwrights either. So that was really through the 70s and early 80s that really started. So 25th, when seeing If You're So Good, Why Are You in Saskatoon, was the first time I really saw myself reflected, my world, talking about streets that I knew, talking about high schools that I knew. And that was absolutely fascinating.
That's so cool. And then you went on to act in the theater, is that correct?
I ended up being in a show, cast in a show with 25th in 1979. So that was my first professional show. And yeah, so that was a very interesting experience too.
What stands out about that experience to you?
Well, it was intimidating, but it was also really informative, because we learn. We learn by that pack around us, right? So I learned from the professionals around me how a theater works behind the scenes, how the rehearsal process works, how you do a costume fitting, how you be in what is the protocol for being in a dressing room with somebody. I mean, all those things you don't think of, right? So it's a very informative. Those first jobs are really important for actors, because it's telling them all of that, teaching them all of that behavior.
Wow. Would you say it was a good place to cut your teeth and to learn all those things?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. So you watch the plays, you act in them, and then how does your relationship kind of ebb and flow in the next I guess few decades after that?
Well, yeah, I left Saskatoon in the 80s and came back in about 99. So I came back in 1999, and that was with 25th, was just when the artistic directorship had been taken over by Glenn Cairns. I knew Glenn Cairns from university. I'd gone to university here in Saskatoon. And so that I got involved in the theater again. So I was on the board of directors, but one of the main projects I was involved in those first years was the Women's Festival, which became the Hurricane Women's Festival. That grew out of, Glenn was new in town. He was meeting, all these people were introducing themselves, wanting work, telling him who they were. He was getting, lots of auditions, meeting people. And there were zillions and zillions of talented women, but he knew there was very little he was going to be able to offer them. So he had a conversation with a young woman who sort of came to him and said, "Look, you need to do something. We need to, we've got all these great women around, and you need to do something. And he said, okay, what should we do? And so they thought about it. And she said, well, I don't know, but why don't we get a bunch of people, why don't we have a meeting? We'll get a bunch of people together and we'll see what we can do. So I think I was just reading in my notes, I think it was like 35, 45 people arrived at that first meeting. So that's how starved, the women in the city were for doing things. The opportunity just wasn't here.
Why wasn't the opportunity there at that time?
We had Shakespeare on the Saskatchewan. We had 25th Street Theatre, and we had Persephone Theatre. Persephone Theatre was still doing very, I'm going to say traditional, as in standard theatre, so it doesn't use many women. Shakespeare on the Saskatchewan really doesn't use many women. They do cross casting now, but at that time there was no cross casting. So the most you had could be cast in summer were 4 women, and 25th Street Theatre had been doing new plays, but they were usually small casts. So that was maybe 1 or 2 women per play. So there just wasn't, in the professional theater scene, there just wasn't a lot of work.
Can you explain just what is to your left here, because this is audio, but I'm looking at a binder.
Yes.
Right now, Cynthia.
Yes, I started. There was the Women's Festival was kind of conceived by this huge group, but then it was administered just through a volunteer committee, of which I was a part of that volunteer committee. And kind of loosely chaired in the first year, and then went on to chair and kind of coordinate all the volunteers and the whole festival after that. So the binder that you see to my left is the binder of the archives of the festival. So mostly it was a little bit of a blueprint for me of the technical ongoing things of the scheduling and how many people and how many volunteer hours and what was the audience and the worksheets and who did what and the different job descriptions.
It's a thick binder, Cynthia.
It is a thick binder.
Look at all those tabs.
And this is really only from 1 year. So this is kind of would have been the thing that it would have been for 1 year, and then you would try to do a template for each year as you were going. But I did find some interesting things when I knew I was going to be talking to you, because I found the first festival, which was just called the Women's Festival, March 8th to the 14th of 1999. And that was at Capri Place, which is now Lighthouse. It used to be the Capri Hotel, and 25th Street Theatre had a temporary theatre in there for a couple of seasons in what used to be the bar, the Capri Bar, yes. And so that was the space we were in the first time. And
do you remember the energy of that first festival that you're talking about now? Like, what was that energy like?
It was amazing. Yeah. Now, I look on this poster, it says 33 participating groups. So there were a lot of people involved in this, and that was theater, that was visual art, music, poetry, and literary readings. So it spanned. It was really a jam-packed. I think the first year it was like just 7 days or something. But funny story. We had, and I looked at this, and that was remind me. This is the press release from the first festival, and there's the press conference on Wednesday the 3rd, and it was at the Capri, and we were all there. We got all the performers and everybody that could be there, so we could have a full room for the press, and everybody had their little speeches and all the stuff, and we're waiting, and there's no press, and they had RSVP'd, like we were expecting people, and it's just like nobody. So finally somebody said, of course pre-cell phones, said, okay, I'll make a phone call and find out if I can find out what's going on. Well, all the news outlets in town had left, and all the cameras had left town. This is early, this is morning, probably 11 or something. Yeah, 10 a.m. because there were dead cows in a field south of the city. So if it was like Hanley Davidson, I'm not positive where, but it was dead cows in a field. So, which was a mystery as to what was happening, but all the news outlets hit the road to go, and we're standing there going, so are they going to take pictures of dead cows in the field? Like, what the heck? But to this day, that remains an expression that anybody that was involved in there, my husband is one of them, that we use. It's an expression for what we use when you're expecting somebody and they don't show up. And we say, must have been dead cows in a field.
That's a really great story. It's hard to compete with dead cows in Saskatchewan.
Well, it's true, isn't it?
It is true. Yes. How long did the Women's Festival run for, Cynthia?
Now, 99 was its inaugural. Second year, so 2000 was Hurricane Betty. So that's when it got its name, which was it's spelt like HER dash Icane. So hurricane, and the idea being then that we could change the name every year. So it could be Betty as you change the name of hurricanes as you go along. And then in 2000, so first we were in the Capri. The second year we were in St. John's Hall because that's where 25th moved then. And then 2000, no, that was 2000. 2001, I believe we were in the Refinery then. Because that's when the Refinery Arts and Spirit Center opened, and 25th used that for the Hurricane Festival and for Fringe Festival. Okay. So I think that's where we ended up. I am not sure the exact year it ended. I was involved in the planning of the festival for those first two years, very much, maybe in a bit of the third. But then there was new management, there were new people involved, and it went another direction. But it was really focused on that there was so much talent in the city. It wasn't about emerging talent. It was about, there was just so many women that could do so much that they, and there was just those opportunities just weren't there. I'm just looking at the message from the artistic director, it was Glenn Cairns, from this first festival. And I'm just looking, and he says, that first meeting I was talking about, 36 people showed up. And then over the next 8 months, the volunteer committee worked towards building the festival. And then he says, in the last sentence, he says, with a smorgasbord, I hate that word, with a lot of work to offer, everything from theater to performance art to music, dance, and the visual arts, this festival is a testimony to the strength and ingenuity of some of the women among us who just happen to be artists.
Wow. That's really nice. And that sort of leads to my last question for you, which is, what do you think the legacy is of, this was 21 years ago, and yet, like, I think that's a really relevant statement, what you just wrote. So what, do you think about the legacy?
It is, and I think it was a legacy definitely to the women that were involved in that. And I hope then that what we learned by being empowered through that, we were able to transfer and keep going to other women coming up behind us. We also, in my big purple binder, we did a post-mortem after the first year, and one of the things we asked people. So this was the performers, the committee, the people involved, some of the art audience, and asked them what they liked most about the festival and what they wanted to see us build on and repeat. And so from that, we started to begin building a mission statement, which was to create and implement a multidiscipline arts event to provide an opportunity and catalyst for the artistic development of women artists in Saskatchewan. So that the sort of elements of that were then to provide an open, safe environment to explore and develop your own voice, share and validate your work, reduce isolation and the nature of artistic, and build artistic community spirit, to gather and celebrate accomplishments. So I hope that those were the foundations of what it was built on. It's what I want to say, what grew out of it, but that was really the spirit that it was built on, and that we recognize that. And I hope that some of those principles we've been able to keep relevant in the community. If you look at some of the early programs of the people that were involved in those festivals, there are people that are still involved in the theater community here today, as well as the visual and literary communities. So they weren't lightweights. They weren't lightweights. There was a lot of great people that came together to make the festival happen, and it was very celebratory, which I think was it was a little bit of up your bum. It was like, we're going to do this in spite of. We're not waiting for permission. We're just going to do it and have a great time.
Cynthia, this has been great speaking with you. Thank you so much for explaining not only your deep connection with 25th Street Theater, but then the history of the Women's Festival, and the next time no media show up to an event I'm hosting, I will think of Dead Cows and You. So
Dead cows in a field. That's where it's just gonna go. Damn it! Must be dead cows in a field somewhere.
Cynthia, thank you so much for the time. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This has been a special bonus episode of YXE Underground, looking at the history of Saskatoon's 25th Street Theatre Company. My name is Eric Anderson. I host, produce, and edit this local independent podcast. A big thank you to Dwayne Brenna, Maria Campbell, and Cynthia Dick for taking the time to share their stories on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. A special thank you to Anita Smith, 25th Street Theatre's Executive Director, for trusting me to tell this story. And a big thank you to 25th Street Theatre's summer student, Megan McDonald, for booking all of the guests you just heard and responding to my many emails these past few months. Megan, you are a rock star. Don't forget to subscribe to YXE Underground on Apple Podcast or wherever you find your favorite podcast. Feel free to leave a review as well. You can also stream episodes on Spotify or on the website yxeunderground.com. Follow YXE Underground on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you know of someone who is making a difference in Saskatoon but is flying under the radar, let me know. You can send an email to ericandersonyxe@gmail.com. I hope you enjoy the This Is Not That Festival happening from July 30th to August 8th, and I know Anita and her team thanks you for supporting live theater in all of its forms here in Saskatoon. Before I go, I would like to acknowledge that all of these interviews were conducted on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. YXE Underground is a production of the Salthammer Production Company. My name is Eric Anderson. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon, Saskatoon.